Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the algebra course in the area of mathematics. For our first thing we're going to go over in this course of math concept, we're going to go over the focus on algebra in the first chapter of its book. So the whole first chapter, we're going to be talking about, ideally, equations and graphs. Let me just write that down. And of course, every chapter has its own sections, and I believe that in this chapter we have around 10 sections. But we're only going to be doing the first 9 sections because it only pertains to a lot of math courses you have to deal with in your area career, whatever it is. So these are the sections and the names of them for each one. The first one, 1.1, is going to be focused on the coordinate plane. And don't worry, we're going to be talking about that more in just a moment. 1.2 is going to contain graphs and equations, graphs of equations, sorry, and 2 variables. Circles. Forgot about the circle. 1.3 is going to be talking about lines. 1.4, solving quadratic equations. 1.5 is going to be pertaining complex numbers. 1.6 is going to contain solving other types of equations. 1.7, solving inequalities. That's always the fun part. 1.8, going to be talking about solving absolute, value equations and inequalities. 1.9, which is the last section we're going to go over, would be based on solving equations and inequalities graphically. So, going back to the equations and using a graph to, kind of based on what they're kind of talking about in the problem and what kind of, tools we're going to need to solve those type of problems. So for the first section, of course, for this class and this class purposes, we're going to be focusing on 1.1, the coordinate plane, which is the one I'm going to be highlighting right now. So this is the first thing we're going to be talking about in our first video here. So hopefully, if you are willing to stick around to know a little bit more about the coordinate plane, please stick around. It's a lot of useful stuff that I'm gonna be talking about in a moment. And then on the next video, we're gonna be talking about 1.2, which talks about graphs of equations and 2 variables. In other words, in a circle kind of atmosphere. I know usually when it comes to circles, we talk about that later in the semester, later in the semester, but in this part, we're going to talk about it in the beginning, after 1.1, of course. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to be learning in 1.9 is solving equations and inequalities graphically. Alrighty, let's begin. So 1.1. 1.1, we know that talks about the coordinate plane. Now, what does it mean by that? Like, I'm pretty sure you're like, well, what does that mean? Like, why the fancy wording, right? Well, another word we kind of phrased it, we kind of call it the Cartesian plane. It's another word, I spelled that wrong. We call it the Cartesian plane, which is the same thing, is just a different name for calling it the coordinate plane. And what this means is it's just, for this class purposes, using these two, or using the same one because they both mean the same thing, we only use this to see the x and y axis on a plane, meaning we are using this to kind of graph points or anything given in order for us to try to, have a picture of it. Usually when it comes to this class and this class purposes, we're always in 2D in algebra. Just this kind of intro algebra. We only focus on 2D. What I mean by 2D, we only focus on the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts, which is a 2D graph. And I'm pretty sure you've seen this type of graph before. It's like it's a cross, and then our x are horizontal, and so it's our x, and our vertical is our y. Usually when it comes to a 2D model graph, each side panel has its own quadrant. Now, what I mean by quadrants, you don't learn this until trigonometry. So if you haven't taken trigonometry yet, it's okay. But it's just another way of fancy saying calling each quadrant by a number. Usually we started for the first panel here, which is quadrant 1. Here, I'll parenthesize that. We call that quadrant 1. And then we go counterclockwise to go from 1 to 4. So the second one would be on the second quadrant, which would be on the next to it, adjacent to it. And then quadrant 3, which would be down here. And then quadrant 4. And now these quadrants are going to have a lot of meaning later on in the courses. Right now, this is kind of an introduction of what they are. But like I said, quadrants usually focus on when it comes to trigonometry. But it's always useful to kind of know why we use it. And where it comes from, actually. Yeah, so usually the x's go left to right. And the y goes from, up and down or down or up. It doesn't really matter. As long as that's y and the other one's an x, you'll be fine. Usually, this point here in the middle that intersects the x and the y, usually we call that the origin. And I'm sure you've heard that word before. Let me write on the next page. So origin. Pretty sure if you have the word that I'm pretty sure you have heard that word before. Origin just means that it's a point in center of a particular plane. Here, there's no points to kind of relate that to it. But usually when we talk about the origin, we're always talking about the point 0, 0. So I'm pretty sure there's always been questions where like, all right, graph this equation from its origin. Now, most of us don't really know what origin is. Origin just means from point 0, 0. Unless there's something else given, the default one is always 0, 0.